He summoned her to publicly shame her before his affluent guests. However, when she placed her hands on the piano, the room became utterly silent. Savannah heat operates without fairness in July. The air was dense and heavy, clinging to skin and making clothing feel burdensome. Beverly Gaines stood near the wrought iron gate of 742 Prospect Lane, a canvas bag slung over one shoulder and a subtle moment of uncertainty in her chest. It wasn't fear, it wasn't anxiety, just a brief pause. A moment of stillness before entering another person's space. She hadn't anticipated employment in a residence of that nature. Not at this point in her life. 48 years old, no children, no husband. Just a one-bedroom apartment near Chatham Square and a voice that still occasionally sang in her sleep. But when her job at the dry cleaners closed unexpectedly, Beverly understood the urgency. Rent, it wouldn't wait. Upon the agency's call inquiring about her availability for a private client cleaning, she immediately accepted before they completed their request. The Whitlow estate embodied the expected grandeur of established Southern wealth. White columns, a wraparound porch, and boxwood hedges meticulously trimmed. It was a place of such refinement that even the birds seemed to move with a subdued grace. She proceeded up the steps, rang the bell, and the door opened with almost immediate responsiveness. "You're punctual," the house manager stated, looking at her clipboard without offering a smile. That was already an improvement over the previous employee. Beverly didn't take it as a slight. She rarely did. It was necessary if you wanted to retain employment in another person's home. You smile, you nod, you blend into the surroundings. The initial weeks passed without incident. She cleaned tile, shined silver, and discovered the location of every control and concealed item. She avoided drawing attention to herself, responding only when addressed, and always using sir or mom. Mr. Whitlow paid her little regard, preoccupied with entertaining lawyers, business associates, or women in high heels, all of whom departed before breakfast. Her presence wasn't meant to be acknowledged. However, one afternoon, while dusting the second-floor hallway, she stopped near the music room. The room was unoccupied, but the grand piano stood prominently, like a centerpiece in a deserted banquet hall. An itch in her hand, akin to muscle memory, prompted her movement. She entered, closing the door softly, and settled down briefly. The keys felt smooth, not new, but carefully maintained. She played a single note, then another, and a recognizable tune emerged, a childhood melody, her mother's preferred gospel hymn. Just a few measures were played, gentle and slow. She didn't notice the approaching footsteps until the final note faded. "You're aware that task isn't included in your duties, correct?" Beverly abruptly stood, as if discovered in wrongdoing. Mr. Whitlow rested against the doorframe, holding a wine glass and smiling knowingly. He was a man who rarely posed a question without already possessing the answer. "I'm sorry, sir, I didn't mean you play." He interjected. She glanced downward slightly. "When I was young." He tilted his head, as if she'd made a comical remark. Who would have thought? And then he departed. Beverly made no further reference to the incident, deciding she had likely tested her fortune. She was unaware that that instance had already initiated something within his thoughts, something he would utilize subsequently, not to commend her, but to exhibit her. Charles Whitlow never needed to strive for charm. He carried it as a second skin, polished, rehearsed, and just artificial enough to be hazardous. At 56, he appeared precisely the Southern gentleman he feigned to be. Linen suits during the summer, costly shoes designed for standing, not walking. His smile could market falsehoods without hesitation. Beneath the outward appearance of success, a sense of decay existed that primarily concerned the staff. To the public, he presented himself as a philanthropist, organizing fundraisers for the arts, contributing to schools, and hosting annual garden parties that garnered attention in the society pages. He engaged in public appearances, shaking hands with judges and interacting with people at political events, creating the impression of a political aspiration, despite never explicitly stating his intentions. Within the house, however, Charles maintained control through ridicule. The assistance was readily available, and he valued wielding it to discomfort others. Beverly recognized this tendency from the start. He rarely shouted or raised his voice, yet possessed a remarkable ability to diminish people's sense of self without physical contact. For instance, he once inquired of the new chef if his sophisticated California training encompassed the ability to prepare acceptable grits while serving 20 guests. On another occasion, he observed a gardener stooping to retrieve a dropped rose and remarked, "Careful now, could send you back to minimum wage." No one challenged him. No one offered a correction. He was Charles Whitlow. In this town, his reputation commanded respect. Even the legal authorities didn't always question his pronouncements. Beverly attempted to avoid him, but that wasn't always feasible. He began to probe her. Initially, these were minor comments. "Gaines," he stated one morning while preparing breakfast. "Have you ever worn anything other than beige?" Later, while enjoying bourbon on the porch, "You seem very quiet. Do you ever speak, or do you simply move about like a phantom?" She did not respond to his attempt at conversation. She continued working. Then one evening, as she walked through the foyer carrying polished silver, he spoke to her. "Are you still playing those piano keys when no one is present?" Beverly hesitated. "No, sir." He smiled, appearing skeptical. "That must be amusing." She departed, feeling constricted in her throat, but maintaining a steady composure. Afterward, the other staff members cautioned her concerning him. "That man's a snake," muttered Harold, the groundskeeper. "He feeds on weakness. Don't let him find yours." But Whitlow didn't need to dig. He already had what he wanted. 2 weeks later, invitations started going out for his summer garden party. Beverly overheard the details while changing linens upstairs. It was going to be a large event. Close to 100 guests were expected, with live jazz music and wine flown in from Napa. The staff doubled for the weekend. Every room was scrubbed spotless. Everything had to be perfect. She had experience with large-scale events. The demands didn't bother her. Provided no one focused their attention on her for too long, she could handle it. However, Whitlow had different intentions. The night preceding the party, he intercepted her in the hallway. "You know," he stated, "tomorrow could be your opportunity." She regarded him with confusion. He moved closer, lowering his voice. "Don't be taken aback if I request you perform for the audience. Just a brief distraction. It might be enjoyable." Her stomach tightened. "I would prefer not to, sir." He lifted an eyebrow. "Fortunately, I wasn't seeking a request." And so, the decision was made swiftly. She found no rest that night, not due to worry about humiliation, but because she understood his intentions precisely. He desired a display, and she was uncertain whether to provide it or deny it. By noon the following day, the Whitlow estate no longer resembled a home. It appeared like a performance stage. White tents were erected over the manicured lawn. Cream linen draped the tables, shimmering beneath centerpieces of fresh orchids and color lilies. Jazz musicians tuned their instruments on the terrace. Uniformed staff moved with precision, pouring wine, adjusting placements, and folding napkins with the artistry of origami. Beverly kept her head down, as was her habit. She arranged canapes, assisted in polishing stemware, and patrolled the perimeter with a tray of cucumber water and melting ice cubes. No one made eye contact with her. She didn't object. The feeling of being unseen offered comfort, a sense of security. However, her hands trembled. The source of her anxiety wasn't the piano itself. It was the underlying motive. She was certain Whitlow wasn't offering her a genuine opportunity. He was orchestrating a joke, and she was the target. As the clock reached 4 p.m., the attendees began to arrive. Real estate developers, local judges, business owners, art patrons, and women displaying polished smiles. They flowed in, embracing, laughing, enjoying drinks, and casually mentioning names. From the shade of the veranda, Beverly observed them move across the lawn as if they were born on polished marble. She felt out of place here. Not among these people. Not in this house. Not even in this city some days. But she wasn't here to fit in. She was here to serve. By 615, the band had paused, and Charles Whitlow was feeling confident. 2 glasses of red wine in and a dozen compliments later, he strolled to the center of the lawn and raised his hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice strong enough to draw attention from everyone. "Before dinner is served, I thought we'd enjoy a brief, unexpected entertainment." Beverly paused. Her tray shifted a little. Some guests applauded quietly. Others glanced around, seemingly puzzled. Whitlow proceeded, his smile constrained. "It turns out one of our staff members possesses a hidden talent." "Beverly?" People looked over. She remained still. He waved expansively toward the open French doors leading to the music room. "Someone suggested I play something, recalling I occasionally play the piano." A few laughs rippled through the room, a gentle amusement typical of those accustomed to wealth and charmed by unexpected moments. Applause and quiet whispers followed. Beverly paused, experiencing the uncomfortable feeling of deciding between declining and complying. Yet, she didn't retreat. She gave her tray to a server, dried her hands on her apron, and entered the building. The guests followed, now filled with curiosity. Within the music room, the grand piano was positioned under gentle lighting, appearing as if it had been awaiting attention all day. Beverly settled onto the bench, her posture upright, her heart racing. A profound silence descended upon the room. Charles leaned against the doorway, holding a glass, looking as confident as always. "Whenever you're ready," she observed the keys. They remained still. Her fingers paused above them. The room anticipated something other than music. They expected a jest, a hesitant melody, a discordant note. A source of amusement for later, a way to diminish her. However, Beverly's musical journey didn't begin with jazz, gospel, or any extravagant style. It started with a lullaby her mother would hum, a simple sequence of just 5 notes, as gentle as a whisper. From there, she expanded upon it. Her hands moved deliberately, as if awakening something. Minor chords softened into major ones. Gospel rhythms subtly infiltrated classical phrasing. Jazz embellishments playfully highlighted each shift. The room fell silent. An awkward silence descended, not born of courtesy, but from a shared lack of words. One woman murmured, "Is this staged?" Another, her champagne flute suspended in the air, paused, forgetting to drink. Beverly remained unseeing, her playing as if transported to a different place, a sanctuary, a cherished memory. And Whitlow, still positioned near the door, had lost his smile. Not because of a thwarted scheme, but because of a sudden understanding. She hadn't been the object of ridicule. He had. There are instances in life when time seems to halt. The room, filled with costly timepieces and carefully crafted smiles, remained utterly still as Beverly Gaines infused each note with fragments of her history. Her performance wasn't intended to create an impression, nor was it directed at the mother. She played because for the initial time in several years, no one was dictating her identity. Her fingers moved confidently, not with uncertainty, but with profound, unspoken conviction. Not ostentatious, not rapid, simply genuine. Her left hand maintained the rhythm, consistently, like a quiet inhalation. Her right hand conveyed the narrative. A range of emotions resonated within the music: sorrow, defiance, and a subdued joy that constricted the chest. Even those unfamiliar with music sensed an internal resonance. The sole presence was the music itself. There are no sounds of silverware, no ringing phones, no hushed conversations. Just her, the piano, and 100 people holding their breath. In the corner, the band's saxophonist set down his drink and leaned forward, his jaw slightly parted. Across the room, a woman, visibly upset, murmured to her husband, "She's playing Duke Ellington." She then asked, "But that transition, did you notice it?" That was gospel. Beverly hadn't registered any of it. Instead, she recalled the sound of footsteps from 20 years prior, her mother pacing in their small kitchen in Tallahassee, humming while stirring beans over a low flame. She remembered the cracked metronome resting on top of her childhood piano. She recalled the tremor in her mother's hands near the end, yet she never missed a beat when playing. She recalled abandoning music the day following her mother's passing. She remembered storing it away, similar to a sweater that was outgrown, until today. Today, she allowed it to return. The concluding notes were subdued, lacking drama or spectacle, simply resonant. Like a statement finished because it felt whole, followed by silence. Not uncomfortable, not bewildered, but deeply respectful. Then applause arose. It began with a single person, an elderly man positioned at the rear, clapping deliberately, his gaze unfocused. Subsequently, another joined in. Then, the entire room rose to their feet. It wasn't driven by a sense of courtesy, but by the involuntary movement of their limbs. Beverly rose from a bench. Her hands now shook, not due to anxiety, but due to a different sensation. A feeling she hadn't experienced in years, relief. For the first time, the room regarded her not as a servant, not as an extra, but as someone who'd offered them something genuine. Someone quietly asked, "Who is she?" Beverly made no reply. She merely moved away from the piano and offered a slight nod. She didn't look at anyone and walked toward the hallway. Someone blocked her path. It was Ava Renfield, a local arts patron known for curating talent across the South. She stepped forward, stunned. "That was remarkable. Do you play professionally?" "No, ma'am," Beverly replied, lowering her eyes. "Were you trained?" Beverly paused. "A long time ago," Ava said, blinking. "Well, wherever it was, they should have built a stage around you." Others gathered. One guest asked if she taught lessons. Another offered her a card. A woman, her voice full of genuine feeling, stated, "You made me feel something I haven't felt in years." Whitlow remained still, positioned close to the French doors, his smile absent. His gaze focused on Beverly, but it wasn't playful. It held something different. Could it be embarrassment? Possibly. Yet it appeared to be a pride he would never be able to acknowledge. Beverly didn't pause for his response. She had already given him more than he warranted, and retrieved something she believed she had permanently laid to rest. Outside, the party had resumed. Waiters replenished champagne flutes. The jazz band resumed playing on the terrace, but an alteration was perceptible, as if the tempo had altered. It was as if Beverly's music hadn't fully departed, but resonated within people, close to their hearts. Inside, Beverly had moved to the kitchen. She sought no fanfare. She desired no accolades. She simply needed to breathe. She rested against the counter, gazing at the floor, her apron still fastened. A few minutes elapsed. Harold, the groundskeeper, entered the room. He remained mostly silent, offering only a quiet whistle and crossing his arms. "You certainly know how to bruise a wealthy man's pride," he commented, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. Beverly managed a faint chuckle, though it didn't reflect in her eyes. "I wasn't intending to do anything," she said. "That's precisely why it was so effective," he responded. She poured herself a glass of water. Her hands had become more stable, but her heart still raced. Harold departed shortly afterward. He preferred brevity, and Beverly valued that. Shortly thereafter, Charles Whitlow entered the kitchen. She didn't acknowledge him with a turn of her head. She didn't need to. He placed his glass down with unnecessary force. "You certainly made an impact," he remarked. Beverly remained silent. "I envisioned a brief, amusing exchange," he continued. "I didn't anticipate it evolving into a performance." Still, she offered no reply. He rested against the counter next to her. "Do you know what people are discussing?" "I'm harboring a talent within my own home. It feels as though I'm a character in a television drama." She made contact with his eyes, a look of composure and clarity. "You didn't conceal me. You simply didn't observe." His jaw moved slightly, a single twitch. "You believe you humiliated me?" "No, sir," she replied gently. "You accomplished that entirely on your own." He looked at her for a brief moment, then turned and departed. The subsequent day, telephone calls began. A representative from the Arts Council and a local music school inquired if she would contemplate offering a master class. A former producer received an invitation from a retired colleague for lunch. The experience felt dreamlike. People who had previously ignored her now regarded her differently. Beverly, however, did not respond to most of the calls immediately. She completed her scheduled responsibilities for the week, as was her routine. This included cleaning the floors, folding the laundry, and polishing the silver. Yet, a shift was evident in her movements. She no longer seemed to be attempting to remain unnoticed. That Friday afternoon, she entered Whitlow's office and submitted her resignation. 2 weeks. There was no explanation offered. He didn't request one. He simply nodded, examined the paper for a moment longer than necessary, and responded, "Fine." She prepared to leave. "You'll be back," he called after her. "They always come back," she replied, pausing in the doorway. "Perhaps, but not to you." Beyond the window, the wind rustled the garden hedges. Visitors would arrive and depart. The staff would be changed, and the gatherings would proceed. Yet, the recollection of that afternoon would linger. The issue wasn't the piano. It was the fact that the woman he attempted to control had subtly reminded everyone she wasn't under his authority, a mark he couldn't erase. Beverly Gaines, however, didn't seek retribution. She wasn't pursuing acknowledgement. She was at long last moving towards something positive, and it wasn't Charles Whitlow's house. 2 weeks later, on a quiet Tuesday morning, Beverly Gaines exited 742 Prospect Lane for the last time. There was no elaborate farewell, no presents, and no remarks from Charles Whitlow. The only sound was the creak of the iron gate as she closed it behind her, and the sun felt pleasant on her shoulders as she walked into the street. She still held the same canvas bag she had carried that first day. But she had changed, not because of the comments from the guests, the applause, or the unexpected attention to her talent. Those things had never truly been important to her. What mattered was that she had recalled who she was, and she wouldn't allow anyone to suppress that again. Returning to her apartment, she retrieved an old box from the back of her closet. It contained yellowing sheet music, a chipped metronome, a stack of journals from her early 20s, and a photo of her mother sitting at an upright piano. Eyes closed, hands mid-chord. That night, Beverly played until the neighbors knocked on the wall. She played every song she hadn't let herself touch in years. Pieces she thought she'd forgotten came back with ease. She navigated these experiences with amusement, albeit quietly and openly. Following a week of evenings dedicated to intensive work and mornings spent in quiet thought, she arrived at a resolution. She contacted the Arts Council again, and then the music school. She even responded to a call from a woman who wished to write a profile on her for a regional magazine. One by one, she reestablished contact. Not for recognition, not for praise, but because perhaps her talent could still be of use. After 2 months had passed, Beverly was providing piano lessons twice a week at a community center in Garden City. The majority of her students were children from working-class homes, along with a few adults, women who had always desired to play, but hadn't previously had the opportunity. She was patient, direct, and kind. She never discussed Charles Whitlow, nor did she mention the party. However, information spread. Following a lesson one day, a girl named Nia, who was just under 10 years old and full of energy, glanced up from the piano keys and inquired, "Miss Beverly, did you truly work as a maid at that large house on Prospect Lane?" Beverly smiled. "I did," she responded. "Did they require you to play music?" "No, dear," she replied softly. "They attempted to humiliate me, but I determined what they would receive." Nia seemed puzzled for a moment. Then she smiled. "You're quite well known now," Beverly laughed. "I'm simply someone who recalled her identity." It was a feeling surpassing fame. She walked home that day, her shoulders squared and her head held high. This wasn't due to arrogance, but because she no longer bore any burden. Behind her, Charles Whitlow continued to host gatherings. However, news had circulated regarding the events of that summer evening. People recalled how Beverly played, the ensuing stillness, and how a room overflowing with wealth couldn't affect a woman who had nothing to validate. Some suggested Whitlow had altered since that time. Subtly, he consumed more alcohol and smiled less. Several familiar patrons ceased their visits. However, Beverly gave no consideration to these absences. She had music to instruct, pupils to motivate, and a life that was now entirely her own. Few individuals receive an opportunity to reclaim aspects of themselves they had previously relinquished. But occasionally, if one remains silent for a sufficient duration, the world presents a chance to speak with emphasis. And Beverly utilized hers with poise. For influence isn't always embodied by the most prominent voice present. It can feel like an unexpected melody, leaving people questioning why they ever had reservations about you. If you've ever experienced being underestimated, overlooked, or told you possessed less potential than you truly do, recall Beverly Gaines. And when your opportunity arrives, embrace it as if it were destined for you. Remember to subscribe for further stories of this nature. The bank manager scrutinized her, questioned her statements, and denied her deposit. However, within minutes, a single declaration transformed the situation. She's my mother, and I own this bank. The automatic doors of Hillstone Federal Bank opened with a hiss, allowing the late morning sun and the deliberate steps of 73-year-old Gloria Hightower to enter. She moved with a cane, not due to necessity, but because she preferred the stability it provided. Her dark green dress was neatly pressed. Her silver hair was arranged in the familiar style she's kept for decades. She held her purse in one hand, the other holding a check bearing her name. Gloria was familiar with this location. She had banked here for almost 15 years. The same branch, the same routines. She typically came in during the week, shortly after breakfast with friends at Janine's diner. However, something fell amiss today. The woman at the front desk hardly looked up when Gloria entered. Not even a greeting. That was out of the ordinary. Gloria dismissed it as insignificant. Perhaps the staff was understaffed. It was possible the young woman hadn't been taught to acknowledge older customers. She proceeded to the counter and waited calmly behind a man wearing a baseball cap. After several minutes passed, and when it was her turn, the teller, a young woman, approximately early 20s, offered a hesitant glance over Gloria's shoulder, then murmured, "One moment, please." She then went into a back room. Gloria remained standing quietly, still holding her check, still smiling gently. Shortly afterward, a tall woman wearing a light gray blazer came forward. Her features were distinct. Her blonde hair was pulled straight back, and her eyes appeared analytical rather than observant. A name tag identified her as Leslie Ryland, branch manager. "May I assist you?" Leslie asked, crossing her arms. Gloria raised the check slightly and responded, "Yes, I need to deposit this into my savings account." Leslie did not take the check. Instead, she examined it, then looked back at Gloria. "Could I see your identification, please?" Gloria readily replied, retrieving it from her purse. She presented her driver's license and the check. It originated from a retirement account payout, a standard occurrence. Nothing appeared suspicious. Leslie scrutinized the identification for an extended period, an unusually long time. She then re-examined the check. Leslie then inquired, "How did you come into possession of this?" Gloria appeared surprised. "I'm sorry," she responded. Leslie clarified, waving the check. "This check is for a significant amount. We are obligated to verify it before processing. We have encountered similar situations previously." Gloria responded, tilting her head. "I have deposited checks like this here before. There had never been a problem before." Leslie offered a strained, unconvincing smile. "Banking policies have been revised," she stated. "I'm sure you appreciate that." A gentleman seated nearby subtly adjusted his position. Gloria noticed it from her peripheral vision. The woman standing behind her made a quiet noise. Gloria sensed that someone was observing them. Gloria inhaled deeply. "Ms. Ryland, I have all my required documentation. This is my account. I have been receiving direct deposit, and I've been a customer at First National Bank for years. My name, my address, and my identification all correspond perfectly." Still, Leslie remained firm. "We still require a more thorough verification. Please come with me to the back." That's when Gloria experienced it. Not fear, not shame, something akin to offense. Not just for herself, but for every older woman who had been spoken down to. For every person who had been regarded with suspicion simply for entering a room. "I prefer to remain here," Gloria stated resolutely. Leslie moved closer, softening her tone. "Ma'am, you must cooperate, or we will have to place a hold on the funds and report potential fraud." Instances like this have occurred previously. That's when Gloria experienced a tightening in her chest. She wasn't inclined to engage in a dispute. not with an individual of this nature, not in the presence of onlookers. However, she wasn't planning to depart, so she opted to retrieve her phone. Gloria's hands moved with measured precision, steady rather than trembling, as she extracted her phone from her purse. Upon the screen illuminating, Leslie's gaze narrowed. "I am contacting my son," Gloria stated calmly, scrolling through her contacts. "He will resolve this situation." Leslie gave a humorless chuckle. "Ma'am, contacting your son won't alter procedure. We operate under established guidelines. If there's no cause for concern, there's no need for alarm." Gloria didn't respond. She simply raised the phone to her ear and moved a pace to the side, distancing herself from the counter. She was weary of being addressed, as if she lacked understanding, as if she were incapable of handling her finances. Two tellers positioned behind the glass exchanged glances. The young man at the end of the line advanced a short distance, seemingly about to speak, but then stopped. The room was quiet, punctuated only by the gentle clicking of keyboards and the quiet whir of a copier in the corner. "Hey, baby," Gloria said into the phone. "I'm at the bank. Hillstone on Meridian. They're having difficulty verifying my check again." She paused. "Yes. Her name's Leslie." Leslie's jaw tightened. "Excuse me, ma'am. Sharing employee names over the phone is something we avoid." Gloria didn't acknowledge the request. "Acknowledgement. I'm feeling well, just a bit tired." Following a brief silence. "Okay, I will remain here." She disconnected the call and returned the phone to her purse. Subsequently, with the same composed demeanor, she stated, "My son is en route." Leslie folded her arms. "Ma'am, I must reiterate, elevated voices or disruptive behavior may result in dismissal." Gloria inclined her head slightly. "Do I appear to be causing a problem?" Leslie's face reddened. She averted her gaze momentarily, then returned her attention. "I have a duty to safeguard this establishment. Improper fund verification puts the bank at risk. Do you believe I am a risk?" "I believe you're not being helpful." Leslie retorted sharply. That was the breaking point. That single word. The man standing 2 places back murmured something quietly. The woman behind Gloria moved closer and said, "She is being courteous. You are the one raising your voice." Leslie addressed them. "Please refrain from interfering. We are conducting a private transaction." "It doesn't seem very private," the woman remarked. Gloria remained silent throughout the exchange. She felt no need to dispute anything or offer explanations. She simply needed to wait. 5 minutes elapsed. Leslie moved away, feigning a check of her computer, but her gaze kept lifting, much like a dog anticipating the mail carrier. The young teller from earlier approached and murmured something into Leslie's ear. Her gaze moved towards the entrance. Then the glass doors opened once more. A man entered, dressed in a charcoal gray suit. He appeared to be in his early 40s, wearing a crisp white shirt, but without a tie. He seemed calm, yet focused, and moved with a quiet, purposeful stride. He made no visual sweep of the room, instead walking directly towards the lobby center, toward Gloria. "Hi, Mama." Gloria returned a gentle smile. "Hey, baby." Immediately, the room's atmosphere altered. The man turned to address the reception desk. "Is there an issue with my mother's account?" Leslie moved forward, hesitant about whether to extend a handshake or request identification. She opted for a formal nod instead. "This is your mother?" he asked. "Yes," he responded briefly. "My name is Grant Hightower." Leslie's mouth opened slightly. Her gaze shifted around the room, then returned to Gloria, then to Grant. "Mr. Hightower?" Grant retrieved his leather card holder and laid it on the counter. It displayed his ID, his business card, and his title, Hillstone Federal, Executive Board Chair. Leslie found herself unable to speak. For a full 10 seconds, silence filled the room. Leslie's gaze remained fixed on the card, as if expecting it to ignite. A subtle muscle spasm flickered across her cheek, the type that arises when a mind struggles to comprehend what the eyes have witnessed. Grant refrained from speaking quickly. He kept his hands clasped before him, standing composed and silent, his voice even but undeniably resolute. "I'm asking one more time," he stated. "Was there a problem with my mother's account?" Leslie hesitated, then asked, "Mr. Hightower?" "We were just following procedures." Large checks need to be verified, and Grant interrupted, not loudly but sharply. You looked her in the face and decided she wasn't credible. You questioned where the check came from. You asked how she came into possession of it. Does that sound like standard procedure? Leslie's mouth opened again, but no words came. Her face had gone a full shade lighter. I've reviewed those procedures myself, Grant continued. I approved those actions last quarter. That documentation contains no instruction to question a long-standing customer while disregarding her identification. Certainly not with a public display in front of witnesses. The bank was quiet. The only sounds were the clicking of keyboards from employees appearing to work and the consistent hum of the air conditioning above. No one was willing to avert their gaze now. Gloria stood nearby, arms folded. She wasn't smiling. She didn't seem pleased. She seemed weary. I'm truly sorry, Mr. Hightower, Leslie stated rapidly. This is simply a misunderstanding. I didn't intend to offend anyone. But you did, Grant countered. You humiliated her. I didn't. You did, Leslie replied. Grant's voice remained even. That was what made his statement so impactful. There was no shouting, no theatrical displays, just the facts, just his presence. Leslie's voice trembled. I didn't realize she was your mother. Grant looked at her. Why would that change anything? Leslie started to speak, then stopped. Do you understand how that sounds? He inquired. Leslie spoke the words aloud. For the first time, Leslie genuinely observed Gloria. She truly looked. It wasn't solely embarrassment now visible on her face. There was fear. The fear of repercussions. Have a seat, Grant said, indicating the chair behind the counter. I'll handle the deposit. Leslie paused. That wasn't an invitation. Leslie turned slowly and walked toward the back, her shoes clicking hollowly against the tile. Grant approached the counter, took the check, glanced at it, and typed a few numbers into the system. The young teller observed with admiration. Here you go, he said, giving the receipt to his mother. Full deposit. Effective immediately. Gloria accepted the slip, folded it, and nodded. Thank you, baby. Are you okay? I'm fine. They paused, a mother and son in a peaceful setting. Then Gloria remarked, You didn't need to come all the way here. Grant gave her a look. Yes, I did. But you're busy. You have meetings. Aboard a run. He shrugged. You managed a household for 25 years with one income, for kids, and a Buick that barely started. I can spare a few minutes. She chuckled softly. You always were dramatic, he smiled. And you always were the calm one. But the moment wasn't over yet. Grant turned slowly, letting his eyes sweep the room. The customers remained present, some appearing to examine their phones, while others paused during transactions, attempting to blend into the background while still observing everything. The woman positioned behind Gloria retreated slightly, creating room for them. The man who had spoken previously offered Grant a discreet nod of acknowledgement. Grant made no direct comments to them, but he did not dismiss their presence. He understood they would retain this moment, each in every aspect, not only due to his identity, but also because of what they witnessed. A woman felt diminished until the reality arrived, formally dressed. Leslie's absence was brief. She returned with a senior associate, visibly anxious, restless, attempting a smile, but unable to manage it. The older man spoke quietly to Grant, extended an apology, then indicated the rear offices. But Grant remained still. She is well now, he stated, pointing to his mother. However, this is no longer a simple exchange. Mr. Hightower began, We absolutely recognize that, and we're taking it seriously. Ms. Ryland has been here less than a year. She's still adjusting to the... Stop, Grant interjected. Don't explain her behavior to me. That's not your job. That's hers. Leslie remained still, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She appeared to be attempting to suppress tears, or perhaps prevent herself from speaking. According to Grant, addressing the associate, the task at hand is to assess the situation within this room and grasp the implications of a valued client being subjected to treatment resembling that of a criminal, solely due to her appearance not aligning with the image of someone who owns a yacht. Grant emphasized, raising a hand, Have you ever met someone resembling my mother and considered she must be concealing something? Have you ever scrutinized a white customer depositing a check? The man visibly recoiled. That's not. Don't deceive me, Grant stated. I'm not the board chair today. I am simply a son. And what I observed this morning was a woman who instilled in me the values of honesty, patience, and respect, being questioned as if she had fabricated her own signature. Gloria eventually intervened. She said, "Baby," but Grant wasn't done speaking. He stated that she could have been questioned with courtesy. She could have been spoken to privately, and any concerns explained. Instead, a public spectacle was created, and she was made to feel unwelcome. The only reason for the interruption was my appearance in a tailored jacket. A silence followed. Gloria surveyed the room, noting the expressions, some filled with shame, others with anger, still others with inspiration. She lightly touched her son's arm. "Let's leave," she said quietly. "Let's not say another word." He faced her, his jaw rigid, his chest tense. But then he saw it in her eyes. That familiar calm. The same calm she possessed while working 2 jobs and still preparing dinner. Amidst challenging circumstances, she demonstrated remarkable poise. He acknowledged this with a nod. All right. They proceeded toward the exit together, navigating past the tellers, the customers, and the visibly shaken manager who struggled to meet her gaze. As they prepared to leave through the doors, Grant paused. He turned, looked at Leslie, and said softly, "Every customer who walks in here deserves the same respect you'd give your boss. Because you never know who they are or who raised them." They departed, but the repercussions were just beginning. As Grant and Gloria reached the sidewalk outside, his phone was already vibrating. Initially, it was his assistant, then a member of the board, and subsequently the bank's general counsel. The news had spread quicker than either of them anticipated. A customer had captured a portion of the incident on video. It was already being shared. Gloria observed him. "You won't answer that." Grant allowed it to continue ringing. "No, not at this moment." They continued walking at a slow, even pace, the sun warming Gloria's head as cars passed leisurely down Meridian Avenue. She remained silent initially. So did he. It was a moment of quiet they both required. "You don't have to rush down here," she eventually said. Grant chuckled but didn't smile. "I say that every time." He added, "I can handle myself." "I know you can," Gloria replied. She stopped before a bench and sat down. Grant remained standing close by, looking at his phone screen without unlocking it. The notifications accumulated, resembling stacked bricks. However, he wasn't prepared to construct anything from them just yet. Within the bank, Leslie Ryland remained motionless in her compact glass office. A regional manager had already contacted her. Human resources required a report before the day's end. Yet, none of that held significance for her at that moment. The image of how Grant had regarded her lingered in her mind, as if revealing a perspective that diminished her, not through disparagement, but because it highlighted the limitations of her own assessments. The subsequent morning brought forth a communication from Hillstone Federal's board. It announced the commencement of an internal investigation, alongside assurances that customers will be notified regarding adjustments to sensitivity training and customer relations policy. However, this represented merely a public statement. The truly significant developments unfolded privately. Later that week, Grant took his seat at the head of the conference table, the familiar space typically used for investment strategy and profit reports. This meeting, however, had a different purpose. "I want every manager to recertify on customer service protocol," he announced, "but not with those same corporate videos from 5 years ago. We're engaging outside instructors. I don't want lectures. I want eye contact, role play, and reflection." An older board member expressed surprise. "That's a significant change." "It should be," Grant responded. "What about the manager?" Grant hesitated. He was reluctant to dismiss Leslie, not because she didn't warrant consequences, but because he didn't want this to appear as retribution. That wasn't the upbringing his mother provided. "She is suspended," he stated eventually, "subject to review." However, his focus is on addressing the underlying cultural issues that led her to believe that kind of conduct was permissible. Later that evening, Gloria settled into her preferred chair near the window at her home. The house was quiet, punctuated only by the ticking of the old wall clock and the gentle simmering of her evening tea. Grant was settled on a couch, his tie undone, his shoes slightly loosened. "You handled it well," she said. He shrugged. "I let myself get angry." "You should have," he replied, looking up. "You're not upset," Gloria said with a wry laugh. "Darling, I've experienced far more challenging situations." She continued, "This isn't the first instance someone has attempted to make me feel like I don't belong, and it likely won't be the last." "That's the most troubling aspect," Grant stated. She took a sip of her tea, acknowledging that this wasn't a new situation. "You can't control how people treat you," Grant said, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "Only how you respond to them." Gloria smiled. "I just dislike that you had to deal with that kind of behavior at this stage in your life." "That's the interesting thing," she replied. "The older I become, the less it affects me." What caused me pain wasn't her words. It was the fact that she believed she could speak to anyone in that manner. She paused. Perhaps now she won't. Despite the difficulties, a positive outcome eventually emerged. The subsequent week, Gloria revisited the bank. She wore the same shoes and carried the same purse, but her demeanor had changed. Upon entering, every employee behind the counter visibly adjusted. The newly appointed temporary manager, Denise Alvarez, a woman with a quiet voice, approached the desk to greet her directly. "Miss Hightower," she said kindly, "we are pleased to see you." Gloria offered a slight smile. "I'm simply here to withdraw some funds." "Certainly. I will assist you myself." As they walked toward the counter, Gloria observed that the posters on the wall had been updated. The advertisements for loans and savings plans remained, but new posters, a series titled Respect is Standard, now hung near the front. Each featured portraits of real customers from the local community, all sharing the same tagline: "We see you. We serve you. We respect you." It wasn't a complete solution, but it was a beginning. Denise processed her withdrawal, demonstrating patience and clarity. Straightforward and professional. Before her departure, Denise stated, "We're holding community meetings beginning next month. These will be listening sessions. Grant asked us to invite value customers like you. Would you be willing to speak?" Gloria expressed surprise. "You want me to deliver a speech?" The response came, "Not a speech. Simply share your story, however you prefer." Gloria considered the request. "I will attend, but I won't present anything in a misleading way." That's precisely what they wanted. She left that day not feeling entirely satisfied, but she felt acknowledged. And at her age, that carried weight. Later that evening, Gloria sat across from Grant again, this time at a quiet booth inside an old barbecue joint in Fort Worth they both liked. It smelled like hickory and cornbread, and nobody there seemed to notice what either of them did for a living. "You remember that day you got in trouble in 7th grade?" she asked suddenly, picking at her baked beans. "Which one?" "The incident with Mr. Hale came to mind. He accused you of plagiarism regarding your paper." Grant sighed. Yes, he recalled. You returned home holding that paper, visibly upset. Tears streamed down your face as you insisted you hadn't cheated. And he believed you. Yet, he still made you rewrite the entire paper. He chuckled. You said that rewriting something sometimes demonstrates its originality. She affirmed exactly. Grant turned to her. "But that's what happened?" Gloria replied negatively. It seemed this occasion required assistance from another. He paused, allowing the statement to resonate. Then she added, "I didn't raise you to be rich, Grant. I raised you to be right." He glanced at her across the table, a palpable feeling just below the surface. "I know," he responded. "And sometimes," she continued, "doing the right thing means you forfeit ease. You enter spaces that aren't welcoming. You voice your thoughts when silence would be simpler. And you visit the bank even when it feels demeaning. No matter the circumstance, it impacts those who care." He blinked once, twice, then smiled. You really should speak at that meeting," she said. "Oh, I will," Gloria replied. "But I'm bringing my purse, my cane, and my full voice. No softening it this time." Grant laughed. "You never softened it. You just made it sound kind." She grinned, then picked up her napkin and dabbed the corner of her mouth. "Kind doesn't mean quiet." The situation didn't conclude there, as Gloria had further remarks. A community meeting took place 3 weeks later within a simple civic center located just off Lancaster Avenue. There were no special decorations, and no filming crews were present. Instead, attendees found folding chairs, a podium, and a hand-painted sign that read, "Listening Circle, Hillstone Federal Bank." Upon Gloria's arrival, the room was already half full, comprising both bank staff and customers. The gathering included older folks, young professionals, small business owners, and a few individuals she didn't recognize, presumably there to observe or report. She wore a cobalt blue blouse that highlighted the silver in her hair. She avoided flashy jewelry, opting for her usual pearl earrings, the same pair she wore to her granddaughter's graduation. Upon her arrival, the conversation quieted. People turned and heads lifted. Grant was seated near the front, but remained seated. He understood his mother didn't require an escort. Not on this day. When it was Gloria's time to address the gathering, she didn't immediately move to the podium. Instead, she positioned herself just beside it, close enough to be easily heard, but maintaining enough distance to make eye contact with everyone present without unnecessary ceremony. The room fell silent. She cleared her throat. "I'm Gloria Hightower. I'm a retired school nurse. I've resided here for more than 40 years. And I'm a client of Hillstone Federal for almost 15 years." There were some nods, some quiet acknowledgments. "I am here today because I was asked to recount my experience. However, this extends beyond what occurred that morning at the bank. That portion is straightforward. I experienced disrespectful treatment. I was questioned regarding a check bearing my name. I was made to feel out of place. This wasn't due to anything I said, nor was it due to anything I did. It was solely based on my appearance." Her voice remained steady. It didn't waver, but it resonated low, full, and unwavering. "Initially, I wasn't angry. I felt pain. I was certain I had committed no wrongdoing. Nevertheless, someone deemed me questionable. Someone decided my dignity could be compromised." She paused, allowing those words to resonate. "I intended to remain silent, simply contacting my son and waiting calmly. However, I came to understand something later. People rely on silence when they behave in such a manner. They depend on our courtesy, our tolerance, our weariness. But occasionally, the most honorable course of action is to object." A hush fell over the room. "My intention isn't to damage anyone's professional standing. This isn't about retribution. It's about achieving change. Not for my benefit. I am 73 years old and possess a sufficient understanding of the world. But for the individual who next enters a bank with trust and departs feeling diminished." A man positioned towards the rear dabbed at his eye. A woman seated across the aisle gripped her notepad without putting pen to paper. Gloria rested her hands in her lap. "We reside in a nation that frequently discusses principles of equity, regarding values, regarding treating everyone equally. But those ideas hold no substance unless they manifest in everyday interactions. At the checkout, during phone calls, in the way we address someone who appears different." She glanced at Grant briefly. He offered no smile. He offered no nod. He simply observed her the way one observes a fire that warms and humbles simultaneously. "Thank you for listening," she said, then stepped back without fanfare. The room did not erupt in applause. It did not require it. A few hands clapped gently. A few heads bowed. But what lingered was heavier than noise. It was reflection. After the meeting, people lined up, not for handshakes or photos, but to talk, to share. One woman said she'd experienced the same thing at a different branch. A young man said it reminded him of the way his grandmother used to be followed around stores. And the bank staff, well, most of them just said thank you, with eyes that conveyed more than their words. That night, while Gloria sat in her kitchen with tea in hand, Grant texted her, "You were incredible." She responded slowly, "They'll remember that." She continued, "I didn't do it to be remembered. I did it so they remember each other." Marlene Daniels paid for her first-class seat in full. However, when she was discreetly requested to move to the rear of the aircraft, she did not cause a disturbance. The remaining passengers did, and social media quickly followed suit. Marlene Daniels was not a woman who desired much. She had never been. This was true when she dedicated 32 years to Birmingham Public Schools and remained true when she raised 3 children on a teacher's salary following her husband's passing. She was reliable. She was resilient. At the age of 72, she had finally learned to do something she'd often advised others to do: take up space. This was the reason she purchased the ticket. Her granddaughter, Alia, was graduating from Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. Alia was the first in the family to earn a degree in environmental engineering. It was a significant occasion, and Marlene, she planned to attend, positioned prominently, dressed in her best Sunday clothes, and cheering as she once did at those high school basketball games. She had flown previously, certainly, but always in coach, always quiet, always practical. This time, however, she reserved a first-class seat. She paid in full. She selected her spot by the window. It wasn't about luxury. It was about presence. It was her way of stating, I'm still here. I'm present. Walking through the gate at Birmingham Shuttlesworth Airport, she appeared like someone who knew who she was. She wore gray slacks, a pearl gray sweater, small gold earrings, and a leather handbag that bore the marks of years of careful use. Her hair, silver and neatly arranged, was styled in a low twist. A smile touched her lips as she greeted the gate agent, a smile offered not from obligation, but from a genuine desire to be considerate, even when faced with unkindness. "Good morning, Miss Daniels," the agent said, scanning her ticket. She appreciated the formality. Miss Daniels. It still carried a certain dignity. As she entered the plane, several passengers in the front cabin briefly looked up. A few offered smiles. A man, appearing to be in his 40s, gave a courteous nod. Seated across the aisle, a younger woman wearing a denim jacket and chunky boots was reading a magazine. Marlene located her seat, 2A, and made herself comfortable. She carefully placed her bag beneath the seat in front of her, adjusted her sweater, and gazed out the window. The sky was clear. That felt like a positive omen. Flight attendants moved along the aisle, arranging luggage and engaging in brief conversations. One offered her a water bottle. "First time in first class?" she asked, her smile seeming practiced. Marlene quietly laughed. "Is it that noticeable?" She responded. "You look wonderful," the attendant continued. "Just wanted to say welcome." Marlene nodded graciously and redirected her gaze toward the window, her thoughts drifting to Alia's smile and the swift passage of time. It felt like only yesterday she had been in the front office of Jefferson Middle, observing her granddaughter twirling in her chair while completing paperwork. She relaxed, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Everything appeared tranquil, orderly, and correct. Then a voice broke the stillness. "Excuse me, ma'am," a flight attendant stated, differing from the initial attendant. The attendant was young, blonde, with an expression that was difficult to interpret. Marlene looked up. "I'm so sorry, but there appears to have been a seat assignment mix-up. Please move to seat 19C. Marlene blinked, seeming to question if she's understood correctly. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" she asked. "There's been a change. A late passenger arrived. The system assigned you to this seat in error. We require this seat to be free." Marlene remained perfectly still. Her voice remained even, and her eyes didn't show any displeasure. She reached into a bag, retrieved the paper boarding pass she always printed, and displayed it. "This is my assigned seat, 2A. It was paid for and chosen by me." The attendant looked at it, then checked the aisle. "I understand. I truly do, but we're aiming to resolve this swiftly before takeoff." The woman in the denim jacket, seated across the aisle, lowered her magazine. She observed her sitting there prior to anyone else boarding. She stated softly. Marlene remained still. Not yet. Her fingers rested on the chair arms, applying just enough pressure to keep her steady. "I'm not attempting to cause disruption," she said calmly, "but I reserved this seat months ago." The attendant leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Ma'am, if you could please cooperate, we'll get this sorted. We just need you to move for now." Then, without another word, a man appeared. Tall, white, neatly trimmed beard, dressed in business casual, holding a laptop bag, and looking impatient. The attendant gave a small, practiced smile. Right this way, sir. But Marlene hadn't moved. Not yet. Marlene's fingers remained curled tight around the armrests. She detected the subtle sounds of passengers arranging themselves, zippers fastening, and safety belts securing. Yet the atmosphere surrounding her felt heavy, resistant to movement. The man now stood almost directly in front of her seat, looking down with an expression that was a blend of confusion and annoyance. "This is two-way, right?" he asked, looking towards the flight attendant, but not Marlene. "Yes, sir," she replied. "Just a minor misunderstanding. We are resolving it now." Marlene spoke with composure, but her voice conveyed firmness. "How is this addressed?" The attendant attempted to maintain a pleasant demeanor. "We simply require you to take seat 19C. It remains a satisfactory seat, and we will ensure you receive compensation for the disruption." Disruption? Marlene lifted her eyebrows. Being asked to vacate the seat I paid for in front of a completely full plane after I had already been seated? That is not a small matter. The man finally made eye contact with her. He did not speak, just gazed. And something about that silence, easy for him, unsettling for her, felt significant. "Ma'am," the flight attendant repeated, her voice now more assertive. "Please." Marlene glanced around. Silence filled the cabin, but eyes were fixed on her. The man seated across the aisle appeared uneasy, fidgeting in his seat. The younger woman with the magazine continued to stare. She didn't desire to create a disturbance. It had never been her way. She had always instructed her students to overcome embarrassment with grace, not noise. At this point, she questioned what she would be conveying if she were to leave unnoticed. However, her dignity couldn't sustain the entire journey. Marlene carefully released her seatbelt, retrieved her bag, and rose. The flight attendant sighed, clearly relieved. "Thank you," she stated, and moved to allow the man to take the seat, where he opened his laptop and straightened his tie as if it were a routine occurrence. Marlene held her back straight as she walked along the narrow aisle, passing rows of strangers who didn't meet her gaze. She arrived at row 19, located seat C, and put her bag under the seat without a word. The chair was smaller, situated nearer the restroom, noisy, confined, and not at all what she had anticipated. She settled in quietly, feeling a stinging in her eyes. A man seated across the row, a teenager wearing headphones, looked at her with a questioning expression. She gave him a weary smile. A weight settled in her chest, not from the seat itself, but from the lack of surprise. She had hoped, perhaps naively, that circumstances had changed. That at her age, following her considerable contributions to others, she wouldn't need to demonstrate her right to what she had purchased. She glanced down at her hands, noticing a slight tremor. Her wedding band remained on her finger, even after so many years. She had raised 3 children, 2 of whom were now professionals. She had dedicated her life to her students, writing letters to parents, staying late to tutor. She had broken up fights, buried students lost too soon, taught kids how to believe in themselves even when the world didn't. But here, on this plane, she was just someone to be moved out of the way. The captain came over the speaker, giving the usual welcome. "Flight time to Indianapolis, 1 hour and 42 minutes. Seat backs upright, tray tables locked." Marlene leaned her head against the window. She remained silent, her gaze fixed. Then, a subtle change occurred. "Excuse me?" The voice came from the woman wearing a denim jacket, who had now risen to her feet. "Hello," she said, her tone clear enough for Rose to hear. "What transpired here doesn't feel right." Marlene turned, visibly surprised. The woman continued, gesturing towards the front. "That lady had her seat initially. I observed her checking in and taking her assigned seat. She presented a printed boarding pass. And you all moved her? What was the reason for that?" A moment of silence followed. Several passengers glanced upward, seemingly attentive. A flight attendant hurried over, attempting to soothe the woman. "I understand your concern, but we're trying to keep things moving," she said. "No," the woman responded, her voice rising. "You moved her because you believed she wouldn't speak out. But I will," and she wasn't alone anymore. The cabin, which had just moments before been filled with the quiet rustle of carry-ons and pre-flight conversation, was now utterly silent. Marlene remained still. She remained in 19C, uncertain whether to feel embarrassed or thankful. Perhaps both. She observed the woman, appearing to be in her mid-30s, with a confident posture and eyes filled with frustration, firmly holding her position. "I'm sorry," the woman continued, now speaking to everyone nearby. "But you can't ignore what just occurred. You moved that woman from her purchased seat, offering no reason. And this man," she indicated towards two, simply walked in as if everything was normal. The gentleman in the seat glanced up briefly, adjusting his cufflinks. He remained silent. "Why?" the woman insisted. "And I want the rest of the plane to hear, because this isn't correct." The flight attendant paused. She began to speak, but then glanced around. Passengers were turning to look. Phones appeared. A red-haired teenager 2 rows back had his camera aimed directly forward, recording openly. A mother with a toddler leaned in and whispered to her husband. People's gazes were moving. Tension increased. Suddenly, a voice from row 3 interrupted. "She is correct." A man, appearing to be in his late 40s, with a beard streaked with gray and wearing a worn Detroit Tigers cap, rose partially from his seat. I observed it as well. She was already present, holding a boarding pass. "You moved her without justification, and honestly, I am not satisfied with that." The flight crew exchanged looks. Another attendant, taller, older, possibly more experienced, approached, placing a hand lightly on the younger woman's arm. "We will be able to discuss this once we are airborne," he stated. The woman in denim remained still. "No, you speak now. This was not an accident. This was a deliberate action. And if no one else is going to voice it, I will." That woman was repositioned because you believed she wouldn't object due to her age. And let's be frank, because she is black. That word resonated like a sharp rebuke in the quiet. Marlene averted her eyes. She felt a flush rise up her neck. She had never enjoyed being the focus of attention. A voice arose from the rear of the cabin. "That's unfair," a younger man murmured. "There's no way that should have occurred." Another person then spoke, their voice raised. "Return her seat." The man wearing a 2-way radio seemed uneasy and finally closed his laptop. He glanced at the flight crew. "Honestly, I don't need the seat if it's going to cause a disturbance," he stated. "I simply took the one they assigned to me." The assertive woman responded with a derisive laugh. "You observed her relocation and didn't inquire, not even once." He shrugged, deliberately avoiding eye contact. "It's not my responsibility." The flight attendant tried to manage the situation. "We recognize emotions are intense. Let's resolve this promptly so we can depart on time." However, the man wearing the Tiger's cap interrupted. "Not until she receives her seat back." He turned and addressed Marlene. "Ma'am," he said, "would you like your seat back?" She paused. She had dedicated much of her life to instructing others on how to utilize their voice to champion what is just. Now her own trembled. "I don't want to be the cause of this flight being delayed," she stated quietly. "You are not," the woman from row 2 responded. "You are the reason it might finally be rectified." That was when it occurred. The man in row 4 rose, followed by a couple situated behind him. "If she doesn't receive her seat," someone declared, "we are not sitting either." Flight attendants began to panic. Someone reached for the phone to contact the pilot. The aircraft doors remained open, and established procedures were now being implemented. The chief flight attendant returned, visibly agitated. "We need to halt boarding," a fellow passenger interjected. "It's too late. The planes are full. Resolve this immediately." Marlene rose deliberately. Her hands were steady now. "I didn't request this situation," she stated. "However, I will not remain here and pretend I didn't receive what I paid for. I secured seat 2A. I checked in promptly. I adhered to every guideline. Throughout my life, I've adhered to every guideline." Then, suddenly, the man in 2A rose. He offered no apology. He avoided eye contact. He simply took his laptop and proceeded toward the rear of the plane. The crew swiftly assisted Marlene in returning to the front. As she passed, numerous passengers acknowledged her with nods. Several offered words of encouragement. "Good for you. You didn't deserve that." We saw. She resumed her seat in 2A. The armrests felt altered this time. Not stiff, not cold. By the time the plane departed, The video had already been uploaded online. As the aircraft ascended through the clouds, the mood within the cabin remained subdued. Marlene was seated in 2A, her hands calmly resting in her lap. She had not consumed the offered beverage. It wasn't necessary. Her mind was occupied. She felt no anger, not a vocal expression of it. She was considering her granddaughter, reflecting on the world Alia was entering with that degree. This incident, this small public humiliation, wasn't unprecedented. However, something about it felt different this time. In row 18, a teenager with red hair had already posted a 23-second video to TikTok with a caption, "They move an old black woman out of her first-class seat for some dude." The entire plane seemed to agree. The reactions were immediate. "That's disgusting. She deserves to have that seat back. What's the airline? Tag them." By the time the flight landed in Indiana, 3 influencers had compiled a video that was distributed by an account called Justice from the Aisle, and it had already surpassed 80,000 views. Marlene was unaware of any of this. She was still arranging her sweater and getting ready to text Alia upon arriving at the terminal. Her phone had remained turned off throughout the flight. As passengers exited the aircraft, several briefly touched her arm. "Your class act," they said. "Glad they made it right." She softly expressed her gratitude, her eyes appearing warm yet weary. She felt unsure how to react to the focus. A portion of her longed to retreat into the airport bustle, simply taking her shuttle and heading into town. However, upon activating her phone, it vibrated, and vibrated again. Numerous messages arrived, some from her children, others from past colleagues, and even a few unfamiliar numbers. Her youngest son, Louis, had attempted to call her 3 times. She accepted the call on the 4th ring. "Mama," he said, his voice already filled with emotion. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, baby." "Why? You're all over the internet. I mean everywhere, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Someone has a video of you standing up for yourself. You handled that with grace, Mama. I'm proud of you." Marlene's chest tightened. I didn't even know she was filming. She captured everything. They attempted to displace you from a seat you paid for, and people are reacting strongly. She paused, taking a deep breath. "I didn't do anything extraordinary." "Yes, you did," Louis stated. By the time she reached the parking area where her shuttle was waiting, she had missed 5 additional calls. One was from a local reporter in Indiana. 2 were from media outlets she didn't recognize. Someone named Mia from the Morning Circle had emailed her twice already. Marlene lowered her phone into her lap, allowing the shuttle to rock slightly as it pulled away from the curb. A college-aged black woman with thick braids and a Purdue hoodie sat beside her. She looked at Marlene, paused briefly, then shifted in her seat. "Excuse me, ma'am," she began hesitantly. "Were you the woman on the plane today? The one in the video?" Marlene raised her eyebrows. "That fast?" The girl smiled. "People share things that are important, and this was important." Marlene paused. "It's odd. I didn't intend to be involved in something like this." The girl spoke softly, saying it hadn't been planned. However, she acknowledged that Marlene had managed the situation in a manner that resonated with many. Marlene returned a smile, then glanced out the window, observing the passing billboards and highway signs. She had simply intended to attend a graduation, and now the entire country was discussing the event. However, the airline remained silent, an unsettling silence. By the time Marlene arrived at her hotel in Lafayette, her name was already appearing in the subject lines of press releases. Unofficially, naturally, no company was willing to acknowledge anything that could incur a financial cost. However, the airline, Coastal Air, was aware of the situation. They had viewed the videos, read the online discussions, and hastily convened in private meetings. Marlene's phone rang again as she entered the elevator. An unfamiliar number. She allowed it to proceed to voicemail. She felt weary. She had traveled across 2 states, experienced humiliation, then received applause, and subsequently been drawn into a situation she hadn't requested. All she wanted now was a warm shower, a meal she didn't have to cook, and to see Ollie across that stage. Her room overlooked a small park where families walked dogs and students tossed frisbees. The sun was dipping behind the trees. Marlene watched for a moment before sitting down and turning on the TV, Local news was already on. The video, now exceeding 2.3 million views in under 12 hours, depicts what seems to be an elderly black woman being requested to relocate from her designated seat in the first-class cabin to make room for a younger white passenger. Other passengers on board stepped in, and the woman was ultimately returned to her original seat. She silenced the notification. Her phone vibrated again, a text from Lewis. Coastal Air has released a statement. It's underwhelming. She clicked the link. The official statement read, "We are aware of the incident on board Flight 482 today involving a seat assignment confusion. Coastal Air is committed to fair and inclusive treatment for all passengers and is reviewing internal procedures. We apologize for any inconvenience experienced." Inconvenience, she whispered, shaking her head. That word again. She remembered all the time she'd written real apologies in her career, when a teacher lost their temper, when a parent was left unheard. She avoided using that term, especially after incidents occurred. That evening, she accepted a phone call. Marlene Daniels? The voice was distinct and resolute. It belonged to a woman, professional in tone. Yes, speaking. This was Nina Morgan. I'm a producer with Midday Matters. We're interested in having you on our show tomorrow morning, just to briefly discuss your experience. It won't be intrusive. You're seen as representing something larger, and people are paying attention. Marlene hesitated. I'm not a symbol, she replied. I know, Nina responded, her voice gentle and sincere. That's why her refusal of the interview felt significant, at least for the time being. A quiet impulse arose within her. She had dedicated her life to assisting others in expressing themselves. Perhaps now was her opportunity to speak out once more. The following morning, she composed a handwritten note. It was brief, a single page in length, but each word was carefully chosen. She began with the sentence, I wasn't trying to go viral. I attempted to see my granddaughter. She spoke about dignity, about how simple it is to overlook older individuals, about what it feels like to be marginalized, not for the first time, but for the thousandth. And she concluded with this. I spent decades telling young people they were important, that their presence was important, that they belonged. I still believe that. But sometimes the ones who forget are not the students. It's the people who think they're in charge. She entrusted the letter to Lewis, who shared it on his social media with her consent. Within hours, by lunchtime, it had accumulated over 400,000 shares. Her story appeared on talk shows. An op-ed piece in the Indianapolis Journal commended her composure. Civil rights advocates incorporated her letter into speeches and public events. A particular comment resonated with her. It originated from a woman named Danielle in Topeka. My mother experienced a time when she was pushed out of a bank queue and dismissed it with a laugh. She stated, people like us don't make noise. I wish she could have witnessed this. Ms. Daniels, thank you. Your words helped me remember not to dismiss things so easily. Marlene was seated near the window, holding her phone and a letter. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't protested. She hadn't created a video. She simply stated the facts. However, the crucial moment she awaited hadn't arrived. It was pending on a campus stage. Saturday morning dawned clear and cool. Marlene hadn't slept well. Amidst the news reports, the communications, and the sensation of being observed by countless unseen individuals, finding peace had been challenging. Yet, her steps were firm as she entered the campus of Purdue University, her focus resolute. She wore a navy blue dress and a coordinating hat, the very one she'd reserved for a significant occasion. This was that occasion. She was unconcerned if people recognized her now. Let them. Today was not about her. She was there to witness her granddaughter's walk. The stadium seating was almost completely full when she located her row. A security guard approached her, held her gaze for a moment, then smiled. Ms. Daniels, yes? He said, I just wanted to say thank you. I saw the video. I'm glad you stood your ground. She nodded warmly. Appreciate that. I'm here for my granddaughter. He reached into his pocket and continued. The dean of students asked me to escort you to a reserved section. For family. It has a better view. Marlene paused, questioning, reserved for whom? He smiled. For you. She followed him upwards to the front rows, just behind the stage, where a simple seat was designated with a folded card. Mrs. Marlene Daniels, guest of honor. She blinked, her heart skipping a beat. It wasn't a spotlight. There was no podium, just a seat, and it belonged to her. Offered, not taken. Shortly, the ceremony commenced. Names were announced. Gowns flowed. Applause resounded. Then, Alia Denise Daniels. The name resonated through the air like a church bell. Marlene watched as her granddaughter advanced. Tall, radiant, her eyes gleaming under the weight of her own accomplishment. She saw her grandmother, and for a split second that proud smile wavered, only to return, fuller, brighter, and glistening with tears. Following the ceremony, the family assembled beneath a cluster of trees near the quad. Her sons were already debating who was taking whom to dinner. Her daughter-in-law was adjusting her youngest shirt. Alia hurried to her and embraced her grandmother's waist, almost dislodging the hat. "You made it," she murmured. "Naturally I did," Marlene responded. "Do you imagine a seating error would prevent me?" They laughed, lingering in the embrace. Alia retreated, her eyes glistening. "I witnessed everything, Grandma. The videos, the letter. I'm receiving messages from students at school, professors, classmates, individuals I don't even know. You've instigated conversations." "I didn't attempt to," Marlene stated. "I simply didn't want to remain silent anymore." Alia concurred. "Perhaps we don't always have to raise our voices. But when we do speak, people should pay attention." Later that afternoon, while gathering her belongings back at the hotel, Marlene received a formal letter slid under her door. It bore the Coastal Air logo in an embossed design. The letter contained an offer, an invitation to speak at their annual Equity and Training Summit, with all expenses covered. They described it as an opportunity to elevate the discussion. She read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in her purse. The next day, she called the number provided. "Ms. Daniels, we're honored you returned our call," said a representative. "We'd love for you to be our guest speaker. Your story, your grace, has moved thousands." "I'm flattered," Marlene said plainly, "but I won't be attending." The woman on the other end paused. "May I ask why?" Marlene responded, "I wasn't moved to speak for your company. I spoke because my dignity fell out of place in row 19. She concluded the call softly and settled onto the bed's edge, observing a small group of children playing in the park across the street. The wind swirled leaves in lazy circles. She didn't require a public forum. She had already conveyed her message, and it was apparent without explicit statement. This time, the seat wasn't withheld from her. It was presented. She simply declined to occupy it. However, there was one final matter she needed to address. The information wasn't shared with the airline, nor with reporters. It was for all of us. The morning she flew back home, Marlene sat quietly by the airport window, observing the activity on the tarmac. Luggage carts, fuel trucks, a slow taxiing plane with its belly full of untold stories. She sipped coffee from paper cup, her hands now steady. The commotion had subsided. News cycles had moved on. Trending topics had displaced her face with fresh headlines. And that was acceptable. Marlene's actions weren't motivated by a desire for attention. They stemmed from an internal resistance to diminishing. Her phone vibrated again. It was another message from an unknown sender, a retired nurse in Arizona. The message read, "I've spent my whole life apologizing before I even spoke. Thank you for reminding me I don't have to." Marlene reread the message, then put her phone away and surveyed the terminal. People passed by her, pulling carry-on bags, enjoying lattes, and holding onto their children's hands. Most didn't recognize her. She wore her usual gray sweater and pearl earrings, nothing extravagant. Yet, if one observed carefully, there was a certain quality to her demeanor, a quiet strength that surpassed mere physical bearing. She recalled the many years she had dedicated to assuring her students they mattered, instilling in young black girls the importance of carrying themselves with confidence, articulating their thoughts with precision, and refusing to allow others to diminish their worth. She believed she had concluded imparting this guidance upon her retirement. She was mistaken. Self-respect is inherent. It isn't acquired through achievement or dependent on positions, designations, or connections. It isn't bestowed by unfamiliar individuals, and it cannot be compromised when circumstances deem it problematic for another. It is rightfully yours, regardless of whether others acknowledge it. That was the core principle. It resonated not only with those who observed her movement down the plain aisle, but with the reserved individuals. Those who suppressed their dignity countless times in checkout lines, boardrooms, waiting rooms. Those who've been subtly indicated to relinquish their seat, either physically or figuratively, to someone deemed more significant. Marlene's story wasn't concerning revenge. It wasn't reflecting anger. It wasn't even focused on that man or that airline. The memory centered on the decision she made, resolving that she wouldn't remain silent for anyone. Just before her flight was scheduled to board, she rose and stretched. A young girl close by gently pulled on her mother's sleeve and murmured, "That's the lady from the video." Marlene offered a slight smile. It wasn't a broad smile, nor one seeking acknowledgement. It was the type of smile that conveyed, "I am aware of my identity." As she proceeded toward the gate, the same flight attendant from her initial journey appeared, though in a different uniform on a different day. The woman looked up, a flash of recognition in her eyes. She offered a brief nod. Marlene stated simply, "Good morning." Nothing more, nothing less. A lengthy explanation wasn't necessary. Applause wasn't required. She possessed something more valuable: serenity. As the gate opened and boarding commenced, Marlene didn't hurry. She waited patiently. She proceeded deliberately, and, upon reaching her row, yes, first class once more, she positioned her bag under the seat, took a seat, and gazed out the window. The sky stretched endlessly. She remained silent for the entire flight because she felt no need to speak. Occasionally, the most impactful declaration is simply holding your place, particularly when others anticipate you to relinquish it. Therefore, if you're hearing this and you've ever felt diminished for asserting yourself, recall Marlene Daniels. Not because she became widely known online, but because she never increased her volume, and yet everyone understood her. If this narrative resonated with you, please share it. Speak when you are able. Remain in your seat when required. And most importantly, never allow another person to determine when your dignity is present.